Chapter 1. The Unstoppable in the Imperium. You idiots never learn. Cain Marko lowered his head and ran. Cars crumpled in his wake like aluminum cans. Asphalt buckled, sending shockwaves through the street as if an earthquake had decided to get personal with New York. Sirens wailed behind him, but they were background noise. The only thing that mattered was the line in front of him, the vector he'd chosen, and the tiny, desperate figures scrambling to throw something, anything, in his way. The X-Men had picked a bad day to try and slow the Juggernaut. Cain, stop. A voice crackled in his earpiece and in his head at the same time. He recognized the psychic turn. Xavier. Even now, half a world away, the old man couldn't help but nag. You know what happens if you try this in the middle of a city? Xavier's mental voice pressed in, sharp and urgent. Cyttorak's power is unstable around dimensional anomalies. You could tear a hole in the... Cain ripped the earpiece out and crushed it between his fingers without breaking stride. Should have thought of that before you pushed me, Charlie. Ahead, a gleam of pale light flickered between two ruined high-rises. The air rippled, like someone had dragged a fingernail down the fabric of the world, and something bright was bleeding through. The Avengers had been yelling about it for hours. Interdimensional event, reality shear, requires delicate calibration. Delicate calibration. Cain grinned inside his helmet. He had a simpler philosophy. If there's a wall, you smash through it. And this thing, this wobbling tear in reality, this was just another wall. He heard the clatter of metal behind him, the whine of repulsors. Iron Man's voice amplified over loudspeakers. Juggernaut, you're heading straight for an unstable portal. You can't just... Cain never heard the rest. The world narrowed to a tunnel, noise fading, colors blurring, the steady thunder of his own footsteps rolling through his bones like distant artillery. He felt it before he hit it, a pressure in the air, a taste of metal and hot dust on his tongue. The faint, sour tang of something that didn't belong in his universe. For just a second, just an instant, a hint of resistance brushed his skin like a spiderweb stretched across a canyon. Then, the Crimson Gem of Cyttorak flared to life inside him. You are my avatar. The words weren't spoken. They were carved into the inside of his skull in molten stone. Cain had felt them 1,000 times, and every time they came with the same certainty, the same absolute command. Nothing stops you. Cain roared and plowed forward. The portal wasn't a thing so much as a wrongness. He hit it, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't just barrel through. He fell. Not down. Not really. There was no up, no down, no sky, no ground. There was motion without direction, speed without distance. Colors that hurt to look at, and shapes that weren't shapes at all flickered past him. Things that might have been screaming or laughing or both. If sound could exist in a place like this. Cain had never cared much for metaphysics. Cyttorak, he bellowed, because if you were going to rage at the void, you might as well yell at the entity that gave you muscles big enough to terrify tanks. Where the hell did you send me? The answer rumbled through the place that wasn't space. I did nothing. That was new. Cain twisted, or tried to. His body moved and didn't move at the same time. His arms were titanic, then small, then infinite, then gone. The only constant was the weight of the helmet around his head, and the iron certainty coiled in his gut. When he started moving, nothing could stop him. Another realm has brushed my domain, Cyttorak continued, the voice echoing through impossible geometry. A sea of raw thought, of hate. It presses against the crimson cosmos. It tries to claim you, yeah? Let it try, Cain snarled into the storm of unreality. I'm not theirs. I'm yours. There was something like amusement. Or hunger. We shall see. The not space around Cain changed. The colors darkened, congealing into a boiling red-black ocean. Thunderheads of skull-shaped silhouettes rolled over an endless horizon that wasn't really there. Rivers of blood that weren't liquid at all, but emotion made manifest, cascaded in great arcs, defying any gravity Cain had ever known. From far off, something vast roared. For a heartbeat, Juggernaut's bravado flickered. "This isn't Earth," he muttered. "No." Cyttorak's answer was almost pleased. "This is something like my home, but crude, untamed. It is called the Wug." Voices bubbled out of the red-black storm, not like Xavier's guiding whispers or Emma Frost's cool precision. These were jagged, hungry, layered, thousands of screaming throats, all shouting the same idea in different languages, different eras, different species. Kill, rage, burn, tear. Blood, something noticed him. The pressure in the knot air sharpened, like a knife laid along his spine. Who scratches at our door? The question wasn't addressed to him. It reverberated across the warp, booming through worlds Cain couldn't see. But he felt it, felt the attention turning, dozens of vast, malignant minds like titanic storms shifting their focus. Cyttorak's presence swelled, pushing back the encroaching madness like a crimson tidal wave. "He is mine." The patron god's voice was suddenly sharper, harder. "A champion, an avatar. You have your butchers, I have my Juggernaut." The answering laughter was not kind. "You cling to a single world, little thing?" A new voice hissed. This one a furnace blast of fury and contempt. "We bathe in galaxies. Your champion entered our sea. He is fair game." Cain felt like a pawn between giants, and the thought enraged him. He kicked at the shifting ground, at the concept of down itself, and roared. "I'm not your toy, either of you. You gave me power. I take what I want. I go where I want. And right now, I want out." For a moment, everything stopped. The warp went silent, a held breath over a galaxy's worth of nightmares. Then, Cyttorak laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "You hear that, blood-drunk fool? He defies even me. This is why he is mine," the burning voice answered, dripping with amusement and promise. "Then let us see if he can walk our battlefields and still call himself unstoppable." Reality folded. Cain's stomach lurched in a way that had nothing to do with actual organs, and everything to do with concepts, like here and there, changing their minds. And then he hit something solid. Very, very solid. He cratered into a world. He landed like a meteor. Stone gave way first, exploding outward in a shower of shattered rock. Beneath that, layered plascrete and rebar screamed in protest before ripping apart like wet paper. The impact shock traveled through foundations, up into hab blocks and manufacturums, sending cracks, spiderwebbing up cathedral-top skyscrapers. Windows burst. Statues fell. A choir of servo skulls, circling a nearby shrine, spun wildly as their gyros overloaded. Something metallic screamed as it bent, twisted, and finally snapped. Cain came to a stop, lying on his back, in a crater filled with dust and choking smoke. For the first time in a while, he actually felt that. His entire body thrummed with the echo of the impact. The crimson energy inside him burned hotter, pouring through his muscles, bones, nerves. The aches faded as quickly as they'd arrived, leaving behind only the familiar, comfortable sense of impossible strength. He grunted, sitting up and brushing chunks of stone off his broad shoulders. Okay, that was new. The sky above him was wrong. It was a bruised, sickly yellow-grey, choked with smoke and contrails and things that were not clouds. Jagged towers stabbed up toward it, each one a grotesque fusion of fortress and cathedral. Buttresses bristling with gun emplacements, stained glass windows depicting saints doing very violent things to very unfortunate heretics. In the far distance, something that might have been a mounting range burned. Lines of fire crawled across the horizon. The dull boom of distant artillery rolled continuously, a low, omnipresent growl under the world's heartbeat. Cain had fought in cities before. He'd torn through war zones and alien landscapes. But this was different. This place was built for war. Baked into every brick, every arch, every skull-carved facade was the assumption that the universe wanted you dead. And your job was to make sure you died in the right uniform, shouting the right name. He heard shouting. Cain turned. At the lip of the crater, a squad of soldiers stared down at him. They wore drab flak armor and heavy helmets, each one stamped with a stylized two-headed bird. Lasguns shook in white-knuckled grips. A few of them had gear that looked more specialized: a bulky Vox set, a longer-barreled rifle, a backpack humming with some kind of power source. They were rattled, but they weren't running. That was different. "Emperor's Mercy," one of them whispered. "What is that?" "Mutant," another spat, finding courage in anger. "Heretic, some kind of warp-spawn abomination, just like the psyker said." The sergeant, a scarred man with augmetic eyes that whirred faintly as they refocused, stepped forward, planting his boots firmly in the rubble. "By order of the Astra Militarum," he barked, "you will identify yourself and kneel before the Emperor's justice. Abomination." Cain blinked. He looked down at himself. Massive frame, crimson armor, banded boots half buried in broken stone, the enormous dome of his helmet glaring up at them. He looked back up at the soldiers. Then he started laughing. It rolled out of him, deep and booming, shaking dust off the ruined walls. "Oh man," he wheezed between chuckles. "You guys are adorable." The sergeant's jaw clenched. Fire. The crater lit up. Brilliant lances of red energy slammed into Cain's chest, shoulders, helmet. They burned and hissed, filling the crater with the smell of scorched stone and vaporized dust. The soldiers shouted over the thunder of last fire, some of them chanting something that sounded like a prayer as they squeezed their triggers. Cain squinted into the storm. The hits tingled. He looked down after a few seconds. Black scorch marks dotted his armor, some still smoking. His skin, where it was exposed beneath the torn remains of his old New York street clothes, was fine. A little warm, maybe, like standing too close to a campfire. He stopped laughing. He smiled instead. Cute. He got to his feet. To the soldiers, it must have looked like a statue coming alive. One moment he was a hulking outline in the dust. The next he towered over them, filling the crater with his presence. He rolled his neck, making his vertebrae crack like small explosions, then planted his fists on his hips. "You done?" he called up. The last fire faltered. One of the younger troopers actually let his last gun drop. The sergeant recovered first. "Keep firing," he snarled. "For the Emperor. For Cadia Reborn. For," Cain leaped. He didn't need a long runway. Gravity here felt slightly heavier than Earth's, but that was more of an annoyance than anything. With a casual flex of his legs, he vaulted out of the crater and landed in front of the squad with enough force to knock all of them on their backs. 3 of them went flying into a nearby wall. One trooper's lasgun snapped in half. Another's helmet spun off into the rubble. Cain didn't step on any of them. He could have. He didn't feel like it. "Not yet, Emperor, huh?" he rumbled, looming over the sergeant. "We talking a real person, or you just yelling names to feel better?" The sergeant, to his credit, didn't scream. He did the only thing that made sense to him. He drew his sidearm, a heavy slab of a pistol with a bore wide enough to swallow a fingertip, pointed it straight at Juggernaut's face, and pulled the trigger. The bolt pistol barked thunder. The miniature rocket shell hit Cain's helmet and exploded in a blossom of phosphorite and shrapnel. The world rang. Cain blinked at the new scorch mark on the side of his helmet. Then he reached down, pinched the barrel of the bolt pistol between 2 fingers, and crushed it like clay. "You guys are really trying," he said. "I respect that." The sergeant's augmetic eyes whirred faster. Cain could see the man's brain, desperately trying to process the situation, categorize it, find a box in his training that fit. He didn't get the chance. The world shifted. Cain felt it like a distant pressure, like the sensation from the portal, but weaker and more focused. The warp pressed close to the skin of reality here, its red-black tide licking at the underside of existence, and something within it reached. The air above the crater sparked with purple lightning. A circle of light snapped into being, rune-lined and blazing. Cracks of raw energy snapped outward, carving smoking scars into the ground. At the center of the new portal, a tall figure stepped through. His armor was baroque, its surfaces covered in writhing sigils and screaming faces captured mid-torment in sculpted metal. A horned helm framed a pale, sharp-featured face, with eyes that burned like pieces of the warp itself. A long staff, topped with a twisting, flaming icon, crackled in his gauntleted grip. Around him, the air stank of ozone and burned incense. The guardsman froze. "Which?" someone whispered. "Chaos Sorcerer," the sergeant breathed, horror threading his tone. Cain raised an eyebrow. The newcomer ignored the soldiers. His attention locked immediately onto Juggernaut, pupils dilating, warp-light flaring brighter in his eyes. "Incredible," the sorcerer murmured. His voice carried unnaturally well, like it rode on the back of the wind. "Such density, such momentum. You are no mere daemon, no crude warp spawn. You are foreign, a shard of another realm." He smiled then, slow and predatory. "How very useful you might be." Cain rolled his shoulders, irritation prickling. "Right, new guy." He jabbed a thumb at his own chest. "Name's Juggernaut. I don't do useful. I do whatever the hell I want." The sorcerer's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I think you will find that what you want and what the dark gods desire may overlap quite nicely in this galaxy, stranger." He lifted his staff, and reality around its tip bent like heat haze. "The blood god will be most interested in a champion who cannot be stopped. The Lord of Skulls adores such directness." Somewhere in the back of Cain's head, Cyttorak rumbled. Cain cracked his knuckles. "Tell your dark gods they can get in line." The sorcerer chuckled. "So be it." He twisted the staff. The warp screamed. Shapes tore free of the air, twisted, horned figures with brass armor fused to their flesh, axes growing from their arms, their faces hidden behind snarling visors. They hit the ground running, howling, the hate in them almost a physical pressure. The guardsmen broke. Training, faith, and sheer stubbornness held most of them just long enough to start firing. Red bolts of Lars fire stitched across the charging daemons, burning holes that closed faster than they should have. A few soldiers turned and ran, the sergeant bellowing curses and prayers at their retreating backs. Cain didn't move. He watched the daemons come. He felt the warp in them, a boiling fountain of rage and slaughter that matched the burning presence he'd sensed earlier. They were like the distilled essence of every riot, every brawl, every battlefield he'd ever smashed his way through, compressed into horned muscle and gleaming brass. They carried momentum. He almost respected them. The first one leaped, axe raised, descending in a screaming arc. Cain stepped into it. The daemon's blade hit his forearm and stopped. Just stopped. The daemon had the strength to carve a tank in half. It had the blessings of a god of blood and war. It had the momentum of its charge, the wild fury of its leap. It didn't matter. Cain's personal physics didn't answer to those rules. The doorman's faceless helm tilted, confused. Cain grabbed it by the throat. "Let me show you how this works," he growled. He swung the daemon like a club. The others barreling toward him had just enough time to realize something had gone terribly wrong before their brother's body hit them, brass armor crunching under the force, bones and ichor spraying across the rubble. The impact sent a shockwave rippling outward, flattening two guardsmen who had been trying to flank the oncoming monsters. The sorcerer's eyes widened. Fascinating. Cain dropped the broken daemon, its body already dissolving into greasy smoke, and turned to glare up at the warp-touched psyker. "You're starting to annoy me." He lowered his head and ran. There was no room, strictly speaking. Rubble, bodies, shattered stone, burning debris, and a half-dozen daemons still between him and his target. But when Juggernaut chose a line, the universe made room. He tore through the first doorman, scattering it like a sandcastle hit by a freight train. The second tried to dodge. It still went flying, spinning end over end into a distant wall that collapsed inward with a scream of tortured metal. A third managed to bring its axe down in a two-handed blow, hitting Cain square on the crown of his helmet. The axe shattered. Cain didn't slow. The sorcerer's eyes flared, and he thrust his staff down, anchoring it in the rubble. Invisible forces slammed into Cain from every direction. Gravitational spikes, telekinetic blasts, warp tentacles clawing at his limbs. The ground beneath his feet warped, trying to swallow him, reality itself trying to say no. Cyttorak roared. Nothing stops. You, Juggernaut's stride, hitched for half a second. Then the Crimson Gem's power surged, a tidal wave of inevitability. Cain's speed snapped back. The warp grip shattered like glass under a hammer. The daemons around him howled as the backlash ripped through them, unmaking their forms. The sorcerer had just enough time to look very, very surprised. Cain hit him like a bullet train. The impact blew the top off a nearby shrine tower, sending chunks of statuary and sacred relics flying. The sorcerer's armor crumpled inward as he smashed through 3 pillars in a row, then slammed into the far wall, hard enough to punch a man-sized hole through it. Cain kept going for another dozen meters, dragging the sorcerer along like a particularly unlucky hood ornament, before finally grinding to a halt in a storm of dust and pulverized rock. For a moment, silence. Then, Cain let the broken body slide off his chest and fall to the ground. The sorcerer twitched. Warp energy tried to flare, to stitch shattered bone and torn flesh back together. Dark runes glowed across his armor, fighting desperately to keep his essence from spilling fully back into the sea of souls. Cain reached down and planted one massive hand on the psyker's chest. "Stay down," he rumbled, and pushed. There was a brief flare of pressure, like trying to shove a balloon underwater. Then something popped. The sorcerer's body sagged. The lights in his eyes went out. The runes on his armor stuttered and died. The warp screamed again, distant this time, frustrated. Cain straightened, dust rolling off his armor in smoky waves. He realized the battlefield had gone quiet. The daemons were gone, their forms undone when their summoner fell. The guardsmen who hadn't been killed in the initial chaos stared from where they crouched behind ruined walls and half-collapsed barricades. A few had dropped their guns. One was on his knees, muttering a prayer so fast and frantic the words blurred together. The sergeant approached again, walking like a man in a dream. He stopped a few meters from Cain, head tilted back, mechanical eyes whirring as they focused on the towering figure before him. "You." His voice was hoarse. "You killed a Chaos Sorcerer." "You fought daemons in the flesh and did not fall to madness." He swallowed. "Are you some kind of saint?" Cain snorted. "Buddy, I am about as far from a saint as you can get." The sergeant's brow furrowed. "Then what are you?" Cain glanced around. The burning horizon. The endless fortifications. The sky thick with war machines and distant contrails. The ambient psychic pressure of a galaxy locked in eternal conflict. The taste of the warp, heavy and close and hungry. He didn't know how he'd gotten here. He didn't know how to get back. He wasn't sure if back was even an option anymore. Not with the way Cyttorak had sounded thrilled about this place. But he knew one thing. He was here now. And wherever he went, there was one rule. "I'm the Juggernaut," he said, letting the words hang in the smoky air. "And nothing stops me." The sergeant stared at him for a long moment. Then he dropped to one knee. For Cain, it was almost more jarring than the daemons. "Sergeant Varlan of the 132nd Cadian," the man said, voice shaking but firm. "On behalf of the Imperium of Man, I don't know what you are, but if you're not with the ruinous powers, And you can do that to their servants. He looked up, eyes burning with a different kind of madness now. Faith, desperation. Will you fight for the Emperor? Cain opened his mouth to say no. To say he didn't fight for anyone. That he fought for himself, for the thrill of impact, for the simple, brutal joy of breaking anything that dared to stand in his way. Then he hesitated. He thought of the sorcerer's amused tone. The warp's hungry attention. The way this entire universe seemed to be built as a single, sprawling battlefield between gods who would happily tear him in half and divide the pieces if they thought they could get away with it. He thought of Cyttorak's voice, pleased and possessive. This place is interesting. If he was going to survive here, he needed a side. At least for now. Someone with guns, ships, intel. Someone who could get him closer to the real players. The dark gods. The ones who thought they could claim him. The Emperor, whoever that was, seemed to be the opposite of them. And if there was one thing Cain had learned over the years, it was that when two big forces hated each other, standing between them and running straight at whoever annoyed you more tended to give you the best fights. He rolled one massive shoulder. I'll fight whoever stands in my way, he said. Your gods, their gods, doesn't matter. But from where I'm standing, he jerked a thumb at the crater, the dead saucer, the fading stench of daemons. They started it. Varlan's lips twitched. In that case, Juggernaut, he said, gathering himself and climbing back to his feet. I suggest you meet someone who can make use of your talents. Cain grunted. If he starts calling me a saint, I'm punching him. The sergeant actually smiled at that. A crooked, exhausted thing. Lord Captain Gallus doesn't call anyone a saint. Not even himself. And he's a space marine. Cain frowned. A what? Before Varlan could answer, a new sound rolled across the ruined district. Deep, booming, like a thunderstorm marching in neat formation. The ground trembled under the weight of armored footsteps. From the haze of dust and smoke, giants emerged. They wore armor that made Cain's look almost understated. Massive ceramite plates loomed, painted in deep blue, trimmed in gold. Each warrior towered over the guardsmen, though Cain still matched their height and then some. Their helmets were sculpted into impassive visors, their shoulders adorned with purity seals and oaths written on parchment, fluttering in the acrid wind. They were walking tanks, with the posture of knights. At their head, a figure without a helmet strode, bareheaded despite the war zone. His hair was cropped short, his jaw square, his eyes cold and assessing. A laurel of some strange metal rested on his brow. His right pautron bore the sigil of the two-headed eagle. His chestplate carried a stylized U. His gaze swept the battlefield, took in the crater, the dead sorcerer, the scorched daemon's footprints, and finally came to rest on Cain. The captain's eyes narrowed. Sergeant Varlan, he said, his voice calm and clipped, even as it carried easily across the distance. Report. Varlan snapped to attention so fast his spine might have cracked. Lord Captain Gallus, he barked. Enemy incursion at Grid Sigma 7. Chaos Sorcerer and accompanying Dialmic host. We engaged and were overwhelmed. Then, he hesitated, glancing at Cain. Then this individual arrived. He engaged the sorcerer and his daemons, killed the psyker, dispersed the warp spawn. He appears to be loyal, or at least hostile to the ruinous powers. Gallus studied Cain. Cain stared right back. This one didn't flinch. There was weight behind those eyes, a calm, relentless purpose that reminded Cain weirdly of Captain America if you stripped away the stars and stripes and replaced it with grim cathedrals and skulls. The captain approached, stopping a few paces away. You are no Astartes, he said. There was no accusation in it. Just observation. No primaris. No abhuman strain I recognize. Your armor is xenos in manufacture, but not of any known pattern. Your energy signature is anomalous. He tilted his head. What are you? Cain considered a joke. Something like I'm your new best friend. But something about this guy's expression made him dial it back a notch. I'm the Juggernaut, he said instead. I go where I want. I hit what I want. Someone from my world opened a door. I went through it. Now I'm here. Your chaos buddies tried to put a leash on me. I returned the favor. Dallas's lips quirked, but it never reached his eyes. You. Go where you want, he repeated. You claim allegiance to no god. Another word floated up in his thoughts. Heresy. Mutation. Purge. Cain folded his arms across his broad chest. You got a problem with that? Gallus held his gaze for a long, considering moment. In that silence, Cain felt the warp pressing closer again, like a storm front gathering beyond the clouds. Somewhere out there, things with too many eyes and too many teeth were turning their attention back to the battlefield, sniffing at the fading echo of the Source's death and the strange, stubborn anomaly that wouldn't bow. Cyttorak's voice rumbled faintly, not with words this time, but with expectation. The captain finally spoke. In this galaxy, he said quietly, those who walk without faith are prey for the warp. They are hollow vessels, easily filled by chaos. They become weapons for our enemies, whether they intend to or not. He took a step closer. But I have just seen you resist a sorceress assault that would have toppled an Lemon Russ. I have seen daemons break upon you like waves upon a cliff. Whatever you are, Juggernaut, you are not an easy vessel to fill. Cain snorted. You have no idea. Gallus nodded once, decision made. Very well. Until you prove otherwise, you will be treated as an ally of the Imperium. He glanced at Varlam. Sergeant, assign men to escort our guest to the command post. He will be debriefed and evaluated by the Librarius. He looked back at Cain. If you remain hostile to the ruinous powers after that, we will speak of how you can serve. Cain smirked. Just don't expect me to salute. Gallus actually smiled at that, brief and tight. I care very little for your posture, Juggernaut, he said. Only your aim. He turned away, his cloak snapping behind him as he barked new orders to his squad, sending them to secure the breach and prepare for the next wave. Because there would be a next wave. In this world, in this galaxy, there was always a next wave. Varlam approached Cain with a mix of awe and apprehension. This way, he said. Command post is 3 levels down, under the Basilica of St. Drusus. We'll get you inside before the next bombardment cycle. Cain followed, boots shaking the ground. As they walked through ruined streets and under toppled statues of armored saints, Cain looked up at the burning horizon and felt something rare bubble up inside him. Anticipation. This universe was built to fight him. Gods that bathed in blood. Empires that worshipped war. Daemons that thought momentum and rage were their personal currency. They didn't know what unstoppable really meant. He intended to teach them. And somewhere, beyond the burning sky, in the churning red-black sea of the warp, something huge and hateful turned its attention fully to him. A champion that defies gods, the furnace voice from before snarled. We shall see how long he stands. Cyttorak's answering war rolled through Cain's bones, triumphant and possessive. This galaxy will learn my name through him. Cain just smiled as he ducked under a shattered archway, following mortal soldiers who couldn't even scratch him, into the war-scarred guts of a fortress city on a world whose name he didn't know. New universe, new rules, same Juggernaut. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the crimson fire and invulnerability, Cain Marko wondered something he'd never really considered before. In a place where gods could bleed, what would happen if he hit one hard enough? He intended to find out.